Hello and welcome to the Mr. 50mm YouTube channel. I'm Mr. Frugal. No, wait, I'm Chris. For today's video, we're going to do another ultra budget camera, the Canon Rebel XT. Tangent time. So I brought this camera up on a The Ramblings video, and yes, I do realize the irony of calling my shorter videos ramblings when my main ones tend to go on for 30 minutes plus. Anyways, for those of you who didn't watch, I got this Rebel XT for $20 Canadian. That came with a camera, a kit lens, not the Tamron that's on here now, the 18-55, a 4GB CF card, and a battery and charger. However, I learned that the battery and charger were very dead, so I ended up ordering a replacement set of batteries and a third-party charger for 20 bucks. So all in, we're going to call it $40. So let's have a look at the Canon Rebel XT. What is the Rebel XT? Well, the Rebel XT, first off, is known by many other names, such as the 350D and the KISS Digital N. The camera was announced on February 2005. Billed as an entry-level DSLR, it has an 8-megapixel CMOS sensor of the APS-C variety, of the Canon variety, so a 1.6 times crop factor. And it comes with Canon's EFS mount for cropped cameras. The Rebel XT has an ISO range of 100 to 1600, and the camera features a 7-point AF system, with only the center being the cross type in this system. Metering is handled by a 35 segment system, and oddly enough, of those 35 points, one of them, or none of them, are spot metered. So yeah, no spot metering on this camera. The shutter is good for 30 seconds to 1/4000th of a second. The OVF is a pentamirror, not a pentaprism. The rear LCD on it is 1.8 inches, but on top it includes a smaller status panel just above it. Memory card is compact flash, of course, and the battery that it uses is a Canon NB2LH. Now, with the battery and the CF card in it, the camera comes in at 540 grams, roughly 0.54 plana, roughly 1/4 knot. When the camera was new, it came in at $899 USD, or roughly $1,450 in sad 2024 depression bucks, or roughly 2,000 depression Canuck tokens. For a complete spec list on this camera, I'm going to post a link to the Canon Museum page in the description below. Shooting the Rebel XT, operation and feel. First off, this camera feels the way it's priced. With the shiny plastics used, the camera looks and feels cheap, which, to be fair, at the time, it is and was a budget camera. It had to stand out from the Canon 20D, which was a pretty sturdy and nice feeling camera. Now, that being said, this camera doesn't creak or anything, but the materials that are used to build it, they're not top shelf. On top of that, the hand grip for me, it feels a bit shallow given that it's a DSLR. However, there's plenty of room between the grip and the lens. So, it's not bad. It's just not as good as it could be. Now, another nod to the price cut origins is that this camera only has a singular command dial right here. Nothing on the back. Now, another thing that was a bit of a lateral move was the use of the sub LCD. I did mention it has one, and yeah, normally it's usually over here, but we have a command dial, a mode selection dial there. So the sub dial here is just on top of the LCD instead. Now, that being said, this is, I believe, the last Rebel to feature a status panel LCD. Now, again, due to the weird lateralness, it being on the back, I personally don't find it as good as the status panel being on top, and the illumination, if you can see it, it's very dim, but it is orange, which is as expected. Now, the, again, lack of a second command dial kind of sucks, but at least on the back, you have a D-pad style arrangement and it does cover dual functions. So you can still generally change things pretty quickly and pretty intuitively by pressing the function on top and rotating that command dial. But again, it would be nicer to have a second command dial. Now, for the most part, again, you can still do most of your shooting and manipulating controls with just your right hand, with the exception of basically the flash and aperture preview. Those are here, and the aperture preview is here, which you probably need to use your left hand for. Now, on the topic of menus, this is Canon's classic simplicity. Basically, it is a set of tabbed pages with options on each page. There isn't really much to it. It's nice to use, and it's pretty responsive. Now, again, this camera being a DSLR, it has an OVF. The Rebel line is, however, an entry-level product, and it shows in the OVF, as I said earlier, it is not a pentaprism, but the cheaper pentamirror. Its magnification is not as nice as the prosumer 20D, and the coverage is 95%. Lastly, even in the focus indicators, instead of the entire focus indicating square lighting up, it is a simple dot type indicator that projects instead of, again, the square. Now, the last thing is that I'll remind you, this is an older DSLR, and this camera doesn't have auto ISO, which, kind of sucks, but luckily changing the ISO is as simple as pressing the ISO button on the top, and if you can see it, it actually brings up your ISO options in the menu and scrolling through until you get the one that you want. So it's never super far away. Operation and feel, image quality, and autofocus. The Canon Rebel XT sadly doesn't have a CCD sensor in it. Inside this camera is the beating heart of a CMOS sensor. Does that mean it can't take good photos? No, it can still take perfectly capable shots. And its 8 megapixel resolution does mean that it can generally display stuff on a 4K display, and it's good once it's scaled and the aspect ratio is corrected for. Now, I do want to remind you, this is Canon's essentially second generation CMOS sensor, so don't expect unlimited dynamic range from this thing or super great high ISO performance. On top of that, the sensor does have an AA filter on it, so per pixel sharpness won't be as crazy as modern sensors. Now, as I do mention that this is an older sensor, again, with the lack of super high dynamic range, it kind of just means you gotta watch your highlights, especially if you're like shooting backlit stuff. You don't want to be blowing out all your highlights. You probably want to just go for exposing for those and pulling up the shadows, although that may lead to some shadow noise. Additionally, you probably want to keep the camera between ISO 100 to 400. At ISO 800 and up, things get a bit dicey. I know, I rattled off kind of a lot of negative things about the camera, but it's honestly not bad. Again, assuming that you're watching this channel because you're into older cameras, you probably are aware of the limitations and you know what you're going to get into with these older cameras. But, they still offer lots of fun and lots of potential for good images at a budget-friendly cost. And, the sensor, it can deliver good photos. Now, autofocus on the camera, though, generally it is good at the center point, and again at the center it is relatively quick relatively decisive. All the other points on this camera, they're the line type sensors, so they're less accurate, they're less good. So for this camera, this goes into the pile of cameras that are basically going to be focus and center and recompose. Again, this 7-point system isn't going to be super good at tracking sports, given the spacing of those points. But, if you're able to keep your subject in the center, the camera can probably keep up with simpler, more linear movements. And, if you do plan to shoot some sports with it, you'll probably have to plan ahead, maybe do some pre-focusing, or, plan where you're going to frame up your shots and, try to use the classic focus tricks. And you're going to need them because the raw buffer depth for this camera is only 4 shots. Basically, you can shoot for a little over, a second of shooting, given the camera's 3 FPS shooting rate. Now, if you're wondering how that would sound on its 4-shot buffer, wonder no longer. There you go. 4 shots. That was it, and the buffer did fill up. Now, I personally find that this shutter sounds pretty alright. It sounds like a Rebel, it sounds a bit light, if that makes sense. Again, it's not quiet by any means, just the pitch is a little higher, and, it's not my favorite sounding shutter, but it ain't bad. I know, I rattled off kind of a lot of negative things about the camera, but it's honestly not bad. Again, assuming that you're watching this channel because you're into older cameras, you probably are aware of the limitations and you know what you're going to get into with these older cameras. But, they still offer lots of fun and lots of potential for good images at a budget-friendly cost. And, the sensor, it can deliver good photos. Now, autofocus on the camera though, generally it is good at the center point, and again at the center it is relatively quick, relatively decisive. All the other points on this camera, they're the line type sensors, so they're less accurate, they're less good. So for this camera, this goes into the pile of cameras that are basically going to be focus and center and recompose. Again, this 7-point system isn't going to be super good at tracking sports, given the spacing of those points. But, if you're able to keep your subject in the center, the camera can probably keep up with simpler, more linear movements. And, if you do plan to shoot some sports with it, you'll probably have to plan ahead, maybe do some pre-focusing, or, plan where you're going to frame up your shots and, try to use the classic focus tricks. And you're going to need them because the raw buffer depth for this camera is only 4 shots. Basically, you can shoot for a little over, a second of shooting, given the camera's 3 FPS shooting rate. Now, if you're wondering how that would sound on its 4-shot buffer, wonder no longer. There you go. 4 shots. That was it, and the buffer did fill up. Now, I personally find that this shutter sounds pretty alright. It sounds like a Rebel, it sounds a bit light, if that makes sense. Again, it's not quiet by any means, just the pitch is a little higher, and, it's not my favorite sounding shutter, but it ain't bad. Recommendation and conclusion. So we're going to start by considering the going rate for these cameras, as it's going to factor into the general recommendation. So on average, you can expect to spot a Rebel XT with usually some form of a kit lens for around 60 USD, and sometimes as low as 30 USD confirmed working. Now, it's actually pretty hard to go any more bargain basement than this, but it doesn't mean that there are no options. And oddly enough, in this price range, you do kind of have other things to consider. The Rebel XT 350D or KISS N Digital, I think, should only be considered if you can find one of these at closer to that 30 USD mark, or if you happen to just really prioritize lightness and compactness above all things. Because for very similar amounts of money, I would more handily recommend the Canon 20D or 30D, because they can sometimes be found for very, very similar prices. And the build quality is just that much more robust and that much nicer. The AF systems are also a little bit better, but overall the ergonomics are just nicer. And the other thing I want to talk about that might be maybe more important than all of these things is actually the batteries. The 30D, the 20D, they use the BP 511, which is actually way more common than the ones that the Rebel XT use, and they're so cheap that it's actually kind of something that you want to factor in if the Rebel XT that you end up finding doesn't have a set of batteries with it, or if the batteries are known bad. Although you can still find third-party ones, I'm gonna assume that BP 511s will be produced till the end of time. Additionally, the 20D and 30D also feature Canon's 8 megapixel CMOS, so IQ between those three cameras, they're going to be pretty similar. And you're just going to get the advantage of a much better overall shooting experience. Now, that being said, did anyone watching this video have one of these Rebel XTs in the past? Was this your gateway into photography? Mine was actually the Rebel XS. Additionally, the 20D and 30D also feature Canon's 8 megapixel CMOS, so image quality between the three cameras is going to be a bit similar, but with the physical shooting experience of the 30D and 20D being that much better. That being said, did anyone in the past, or did anyone watching this use a Rebel XT in the past? Was it your gateway into photography? Mine was actually the Rebel XS or the 1000D. If not, what was your first camera? Until next time, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And maybe a super thanks, maybe? Bye.